Welcome back to the Simulator Series. In today's episode, we're going to be rewarding the players who place within the top 50 of our global leaderboards. Now, hopping directly into Roblox Studio, the first thing that we're going to do is set up a model. This model is going to be used to display a GUI to tell the players that they will be rewarded if they do place within the top 50 of our leaderboards. In addition to that, it'll inform the players when the current leaderboard season is ending, and they will be reset, as well as the players being rewarded. So, in order to set this model up, we're actually going to be using the same model that we used for our leaderboard. We're going to go ahead and select any of the ones that we set up previously, and then duplicate it. Now, once we've duplicated it, we're going to want to go ahead and rename this from being called Leaderboard to being called Leaderboard Info. In addition to that, we're going to want to scroll all the way down to where we can see its attributes, and then we're going to want to remove the type attribute from it. In addition to that, we're going to want to move it over a little bit, and then we're going to want to resize it. Now, of course, you can go ahead and use the scale tool to resize it, but I'm also just going to go ahead and adjust the model scale property. I'm actually going to set this property to 0.375, and that makes it a lot smaller. Now, of course, we can drag this around a little bit and move it to wherever we want to. I'm going to rotate it a little bit and just put it right beside our other leaderboards, just like that. Now that we have the model set up, the next thing that we're going to do is set up the GUI. So what we're going to do is go inside of our server storage. We're going to duplicate this service GUI, and we're going to rename this from being called Leaderboard GUI to being called Leaderboard Info GUI. We'll then select our model, and then we'll go ahead and drag this GUI into the Leaderboard Info model and make sure to put that inside of the board part so that we can actually see it. So now that we can actually see the GUI, let's get to work on creating it. So inside of here, the first thing that we're going to do is go ahead and delete the container. Then for the title, instead of saying most clicks, what we're actually going to say is Leaderboard Rewards. Then we have the refresh label, which we're actually going to rename to be called Reset. And then for the text of this, we're going to say something like resets in and then some time. Then what we're going to do is go ahead and duplicate the title text label and rename this to be called Description. Then let's go ahead and center this. So 0.5 and 0.5. Then we'll of course go ahead and resize it. On the X scale, we're actually going to set this to 0.9 to make it a little bit smaller rather than being the entire width. And for the Y scale, we're going to set that to 0.3. Then for the text, we're going to say place within the top 50 to receive an exclusive pet. Then we'll go ahead and adjust the font of this and make it not bold. And now I think that GUI is looking pretty good. So then what we can do is take the GUI and put that back inside of the server storage with our other GUI. Now that we're finished creating the GUI, let's go ahead and create the config module. So we're going to go inside of the replicated storage, inside of the configs folder, and go ahead and add a brand new module script. Now I'm going to go ahead and rename this module script to be called Leaderboards, and we'll go ahead and update the module variable as well. Now inside of here, we're going to create a shared variable. So we're going to say leaderboards dot, and this variable's name is going to be called rewards. And that's going to be equal to a table. Now, this table is going to be a dictionary. The keys of this table are going to be UNIX timestamps, which are numbers. And those timestamps are going to be used to mark when that leaderboard season should actually end. Now, as I always recommend the UNIXtimestamp.com website every single time we work with UNIX timestamps, there will be a link down below in the description to this website, but I would recommend using this part right here where it says enter a date and time. So let's say, for instance, that today is December 2nd, and I want my leaderboards to run until the last day of December. What I would do is set the day to 31 because that would be the last day in December, and then you can adjust the hours, minutes, and seconds to however you want to. How I've just set this up is for it to reset on the 31st at the last second before the month actually changes to January. So then we can click convert, it'll give us that UNIX timestamp, it'll tell us the GMT version of it, and it'll also tell me what this looks like in my time zone, and it'll also display what this looks like in relative time. Now, if you don't know what relative time means, it's basically just plain English. So if I change this a little bit, it says in a day, or if I change it a little bit more, it'll say in 5 hours. So that definitely helps with making this easier to understand. So yeah, usually I'd have my leaderboard seasons run for about 30 days. But since this is a video and we want to be able to test the entire system to verify that everything works, we're probably going to be changing the UNIX timestamp a little bit here and there as we do our different tests. But anyways, there's a link down below in the description to the website. I'm just going to go ahead and take this UNIX timestamp for now. Although, like I said, we will probably change this to a different one, and I will show you when I do that. We'll just take this one to use it as an example to get this set up. Anyways, now that I have my timestamp, I'm going to go ahead and surround it in brackets, and then we'll go ahead and paste that timestamp in. Then we'll go ahead and set the value of that to a table. Now, this table is going to hold information about the reward that players will receive if they do place within the top 50. And what are we going to be rewarding players who do place within the top 50? Well, we are going to be giving them an exclusive pet. So the first property that we're going to add inside of here is going to be called pet, and that's going to be set to a string, and that string is actually going to be the name of the pet. Now, of course, since this is just for demonstration purposes, I'm going to go ahead and reward them with a dog pet. Then we'll add another property, which is going to be called rarity, and we'll set that equal to legendary. Finally, we'll add one more property, which is going to be called upgrade, and we should set this to either shiny, golden, or rainbow, and I'm of course going to go ahead and set this to rainbow. Now that we've done that, let's go ahead and create a shared function inside of here. So this function is going to be called getReward, and it's going to accept a timestamp, which of course is going to be a number. And what are we going to do inside this function? Well, it's really simple. What we're going to do is we're going to return, and then we're simply going to say leaderboards.rewards and index that with the specific timestamp. And now with that being said, we're all done with creating the leaderboards config. So we can go ahead and close out of that. Now the next thing that we want to do is actually update the player's data. So we're going to go inside of the replicated storage, inside of the player data folder, and open up the template module script. Inside of here, we're going to scroll all the way down to the template table, go towards the very bottom, and after we add the pet boost key, we're going to go ahead and add a brand new key, which is going to be called Leaderboard Rewards, and we're going to set that equal to a blank table. Now, the way that we're going to be using this player data is to determine if the player has received their rewards for placing in the leaderboards or not. And now, how this table is going to be set up is once the player receives a reward, this table is going to be a dictionary. So the keys are going to be timestamps, and the values are just going to be a boolean, which is going to be true. So if the player does receive their reward, what we want to do is add that timestamp inside of here for whatever leaderboard season that the player did get rewarded for, and then we're setting that equal to true to indicate that the player did receive that reward. And in return, they did not receive any rewards, then this table is just going to remain blank for all those other players. But of course, over time, as more leaderboard seasons pass by, depending on how many times that player has won, different timestamps will be stored inside of here with the value equaling to true to indicate that that player has been rewarded, so we should not reward them multiple times. If that was confusing to you at all, don't worry about it. You should be able to understand it as we go through and actually interact with this data. But with that being said, that's all that we have to add to the player data, so we can go ahead and close out of that. Now, the next thing we're going to do is start actually scripting this entire system. So we're going to go inside of the server script service, and we're going to go ahead and open up the leaderboards module script. Inside of here, above our data stores variable, we're going to create a brand new variable, and this is going to be a mostly constant variable. We only should ever change this variable if we are testing or if the leaderboard season has ended and we're starting the next season. So of course, what this variable is going to be set to is actually the timestamp for when this season will end. Now that we've created that timestamp, we're actually going to update the keys that we pass through to all of our getOrdered data store method calls. Instead of just passing through leaderboard clicks, leaderboard rebirths, leaderboard gems, and things like that, what we're going to do is still say the same thing. So leaderboard clicks, but this time we're going to add an underscore. And in addition to the underscore, we're also going to include the leaderboard end timestamp inside of the key as well. So let's go ahead and update all of the other ones. And of course, we'll change clicks to rebirths, and then from clicks to gems. So now, when you do this, it is going to reset your current leaderboards. So if you took this system from the last episode and you're already using it in your live game, obviously I would not have actually recommended that because we still have work to do on this system. But if you were doing that and now you implement this system, you are going to actually reset your leaderboards. So definitely keep that in mind. The next thing that we're going to do is create a variable for a brand new data store that we're going to be using as well. This variable is going to be called winners data store. And like I said, this is going to be set to a brand new data store. So we're going to say data store service. Then we'll use a method called get data store. And the name of our data store is going to be called leaderboard winners. And we're going to be using this data store to store all of the winners from each season. The reason that we're doing that is because in the future episodes, we're actually going to want to be able to display winners from previous seasons. And we're also going to use this to give previous winners their reward as well. Below that, we have our Leaderboard GUI variable. We can go ahead and copy and paste this and rename this to be called Leaderboard Info GUI, just like that. Then below that, we do have our variable for our Leaderboard Parts. Let's go ahead, copy and paste this. We're going to rename this from Leaderboard Parts to be called Leaderboard Info Parts. Now this table is going to be set up pretty similarly, but the only thing that we actually have to remove from here is the type. Because of course our leaderboard infos do not have any specific type, as they are not leaderboards. Now, between our earnings variable and the last state update time variable, we're going to go ahead and create two brand new types. The first type is going to be called winners, which is going to be set to a table. Now this table is going to be a dictionary. The keys are actually going to be strings, while the values are going to be tables. Now, to explain what this string is, it's probably worth commenting just so that we never forget this. This string is actually going to be a number that was converted to a string. And more specifically, the number was actually the timestamp for when the leaderboard ended and the winners were saved. So when we save tables to data stores, a table's keys are actually converted from numbers to strings. So if you were to save a table which had numbers as keys, whenever you receive that data back, those numbers would actually be converted into strings. So what each string is actually going to be is the previous leaderboard end timestamp. And now what this table is going to hold is actually all of the winners and some information about each winner from our leaderboard during that season. So the keys that are going to be stored inside of here are actually going to be numbers, and their values are going to be a table. So like I said, inside of this table, we're going to store information about each individual winner. So the information that we're going to store is going to be the user ID, which of course is going to be a number, and we'll also store their amount of clicks as well, which is going to be a number as well. Now I know that I just told you when when numbers are used as keys, and we try to store that inside of a data store, those numbers are actually converted to strings. The thing is though, is that if we create our table and we're able to convince Roblox that the table that we're actually creating is an array and not a dictionary, so if we're using numbers like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, rather than like 999,000, which would be like a UNIX timestamp, then Roblox will think that that's an array, and those numbers will not be converted to strings. So that's why this is going to be an individual number here, because the number is actually going to be the position that the player placed in. So if a player placed number 1, then this number would actually be 1. Then we would store their user ID and the amount of clicks that they placed with inside of this table. But again, when it comes to the string, this is going to be a UNIX timestamp for whatever leaderboard season this is containing data for. Anyways, to make things even easier to understand, what we're going to do is we're actually going to extract the information from this table and create it into its own type. And we may actually use this type in another script, so we're going to say export type. This type is going to be called winner info. We're going to set that equal to a table, and like I said, we're just going to extract this information directly from it, so we'll paste that inside of here. And now for the value, we can say winner info, just like that. Awesome. So now that we've created those types, we can go ahead and start creating some variables. Right above our leaderboards variable, we're going to go ahead and create another variable, which is going to be called winners, and of course, that's going to be set to the winners type. Additionally, we're going to set that equal to something, and what we're going to set that equal to is actually using that winners data store that we created earlier to get all of our winners data. So we're going to say winners data store, get async, and for the key, we're going to say winners. And now if we don't actually get anything from that data store, maybe we didn't save anything there yet, we're just going to set this equal to a blank table. In addition to that, below this variable, we're going to create another variable, which is going to be called winners saved, and we're going to set that equal to false by default. And when our season ends, we're going to be using this variable to see if the winners have actually already been saved, and if they have not been saved, then we're going to go ahead and save that information. Of course, we don't want to save it multiple times because there's no need to. And one of the last few variables that we need to create is we want to make this local winners variable accessible by other scripts that require this module. So we're going to say leaderboards.winners equals, and then set that equal to our winners variable. Awesome. And with all that being said, we can now get around to creating some functions. So in between our earnings variable and the adjust leaderboard function, what I'm going to do is add a blank comment here. And now we're going to store all the code related to this system directly between these two comments right here in order to try to stay a little bit more organized. Anyways, the first function that we're going to create in here is going to be called setup leaderboard infos. And it's going to be pretty similar to our setup leaderboard parts function that we created a little bit further below. So let's go ahead and copy that for loop and paste that directly inside of this function. So we are going to want to get all of the descendants of the workspace. Instead of using the find method on the descendant's name, we're going to check if the name equals leaderboard info. And we also want to make sure that the descendant is a model. Now, if both of those are true, then we know that we found the models that we're looking for. And what we're going to do is actually insert that model into our leaderboard info parts variable. So we're going to say table.insert leaderboard info parts and insert the descendant directly inside of there. Now let's go ahead and add the GUI to it. So we're going to say local GUI equals, and then we'll say leaderboard info GUI, clone that, and then all we actually have to do is parent that clone to the primary part of this model. So descendant.primary part. Now let's go ahead and make a quick change to the leaderboard info parts variable. Originally, this table was going to be an array of other tables which had a model property inside of it, but instead of doing that, this is actually just going to be an array of models. So we can update the type just like that. Anyways, now that we've set the GUI up, the next thing that we actually have to do is create a function for updating the GUI. So we're going to create a function called update reset display, which is not going to have any parameters. And the first thing that we need to do inside of this function is determine how much time until the leaderboard should reset. So we're going to create a variable called time until reset, which is going to be equal to the leaderboard end timestamp. And we're going to go ahead and subtract the current time from that timestamp. Then what we're going to do is loop through all of our leaderboard info parts. So we're going to say for underscore part in leaderboard info parts do. Then we're going to go ahead and create a variable for its GUI. So we're going to say part.primary part, and then we're going to index that with the leaderboard info GUI that should now be stored inside of it. Now we want to update the text of the reset text label, but that depends on what the time until reset is. If the current time is actually past the leaderboard end timestamp, then we want to display that the leaderboards will reset soon. But if the time is actually before when the leaderboard should reset, then we want to display how much time until the leaderboard should reset. So if time until reset is less than or equal to 0, then that actually means that the leaderboards should be resetting. So what we're going to do is we're going to go inside of the GUI, which has a frame, and inside of that frame, we have the reset text label, and we're going to set the text that equal to resetting soon. Now, if the time until reset is greater than 0, then that means that there is still time before the reset actually happens. So again, we're going to go ahead and change the text of this, and instead of setting it to resetting soon, we're going to set it to resets in. Then we'll go ahead and use the format time module, convert that to HMS, and then we'll pass through the time until reset variable. And now that'll actually display how much time until the leaderboards reset. Cool, so now that we've created both these functions, let's go ahead and use them. And where are we going to use the setup leaderboard infos function? Well, we're going to go down towards the bottom of our script, and after we call the fetch leaderboard states function, we're going to go ahead and call setup leaderboard infos. And now where are we going to call update reset display? Well, we're actually going to call that beneath where we call the update refresh display. So we're going to say update reset display, just like that. Then let's go back to where we created those two functions because we need to create another one. This function is going to be called save winners. And the first thing that we want to do inside of here is check if we already have saved the winners. So we're going to create a variable called isSavedAlready. And how we're going to determine if we've already saved the leaderboards or not is we're going to say leaderboards, and then we're going to get the winners variable, and we're going to index that with the specific timestamp. But we need to make sure that we convert that timestamp into a string. So we're going to say toString, and then we're going to say leaderboard and timestamp, just like that. Now, if they already have been saved, then we're going to go ahead and stop the function right there because we don't need to save the winners a second time. Then inside of here, we're going to create another variable called winners, and that's going to be set to a blank table. And now we're going to go ahead and actually start saving all of our winners. So what we want to do is loop through the top 50 players in our leaderboard. So we're going to say for position, info in leaderboard state dot clicks do. And now the first thing that we're going to do inside of this for loop is if the position is greater than 50, then we're going to go ahead and break this for loop because we don't actually care to save any players who have placed after 50. As usual though, if you want to modify the system to fit your needs, maybe you want to do the top 100 or anything like that, you certainly can, but we're going to limit this to the top 50 players. We're then going to go ahead and create a variable called winner info, which of course is going to be set to the winner info type, so it's going to be a table. And of course inside of this table, we're going to store two properties. The first property is going to be called user ID, and that's going to be equal to info.userID. And then we also want to store the amount as well, which of course is going to be equal to info.amount. So now that we've organized that information about this specific player who is placed within the top 50, we want to go ahead and add that player to the winners table. So we're going to say winners, and then we're going to index that with the specific position and set that equal to winner info, just like that. Now, I do want to highlight here that earlier when I was talking about if we're able to convince Roblox that the data that we're saving to the data store is actually an array and not a dictionary, those keys will be saved as numbers instead of strings. This is exactly what I was referring to. So even though this actually looks like a dictionary, you can think of this just like Roblox will think of this as an array, and these positions will not be converted from numbers to strings. They will remain numbers whenever we save them and whenever we get that data back in the future. So now that we're storing that winner's information inside of a table, another thing that we want to do right here is actually reward the winner. And we're going to leave a comment here because we are going to come back to this in a minute. But now let's go ahead and do something after this for loop is finished. Once this for loop has finished and we've now created a table with our top 50 winners, what we need to do is actually save that information to our data store. And we also have to update our winners variable as well. So first we're going to say leaderboards.winners, and then we're going to index that table with toString, and we're going to convert our end timestamp to a string. And of course, for the value, we're going to set that equal to the winners variable. So now that we've updated that variable with all of the most recent winners, the next thing that we have to do is actually save this data to the data store. So we're going to say winners data store, and then use the set async method. For the key, we're going to say winners, and then we're going to go ahead and save the leaderboard.winners variable. So that's why we're actually updating this variable, because we want to add all of our new winners for this season to this variable. And remember, this variable contains all of our past winners as well. So it's not like we want to overwrite and we only want to save the most recent winners. We're saving each season of winners to this data store so that we can track all of our winners throughout the entire time that we've had this entire system created. Anyways, after we save all of that, the next thing that we want to do is actually set the winner saved variable equal to true so that we make sure that we don't save this data multiple times. Cool. So now that we've created this function, where are we going to actually use it? Well, we can scroll all the way down to where we actually call update reset display, which is inside of our while loop that runs every second. And below where we call update reset display, we're going to go ahead and create a variable, which is going to be called should save winners. And what we want to do is check if the current time has passed when our end timestamp actually is. So the data should be saved. But in addition to that, we also want to make sure that we have not already saved that data. So we need to use our winner saved variable from earlier. So the first thing we're going to do is say OS time is greater than or equal to the end timestamp. So if it is greater than or equal to that timestamp, then we know that it is time to save the player's data and it is time to reset the leaderboards. But again, in addition to that, we also want to make sure that we have not saved the data already. So we're going to say and winner saved is equal to false. So if both of these conditions are true, then we know that we do want to save winners. So if should save winners, then what are we going to do? Well, we're going to go ahead and call that save winners function just like that. So with all that being said, we are now saving winners, and that is all perfect. One of the last things that we need to do though is actually set up how we're going to reward players. Now, the way that we're going to set up the reward system is really not the way that I prefer to set it up, But because of my lack of foresight and my poor planning when it came to actually creating the series originally, it's just something that we have to do, and I do apologize for that. But basically, what we're going to do is we want to go ahead and create another shared variable. This is going to be called reward, and it's actually going to be set to a bindable event. Now, we're going to use this bindable event in our pet script, and we're going to listen for this to be fired, and whenever it's fired, we're going to go ahead and reward the player with a pet. So we'll go ahead and get to that in a minute, but let's go ahead and set up actually using this bindable event. And where are we going to use it? Well, we're going to go ahead and use it in our save winners function, right where we left this comment at. So the first thing that we want to do is create a variable called player. The reason that we're creating this variable is because we actually want to check if the player is currently in the game on this specific server right now. Because if the player is not in our game, then we cannot give them a pet. Instead, we'll give that player the pet whenever they join the game if they're not already in it. So in order to check if the player is currently in the game, we're going to say players get player by user ID, which if you didn't know, this will return the player with the given user ID if they are in our game. So we're going to go ahead and pass through info.userid. And like I said, if we do actually find the player, then let's go ahead and fire off that bindable event. So we're going to say leaderboards.reward, fire. And what information are we going to pass through to anything listening to this event? Well, we're going to go ahead and pass through the player, and we're also going to pass through the timestamp as well. And with that being said, that's actually the last thing that we have to do inside of the script, so we can go ahead and close out of that. Now that we've done that, let's go ahead and actually implement rewarding the player with the pet, and we can do that by going into the pets module script. So let's go ahead and open up that. And now, first things first, we want to go ahead and require the leaderboards module script. So we're going to say local leaderboards equals require server script service dot leaderboards. In addition to that, we also want to create a variable for the leaderboards config. So we'll say leaderboards, and then we'll go ahead and rename this variable to be called leaderboards config. So we now have leaderboards and the leaderboards config. Then let's scroll all the way down towards the bottom of the script, and right below our last function, which is the enchant pet function, we're going to go ahead and create a new function. This function is going to be called reward leaderboard pet, and for the parameters, we're going to accept the player as well as the timestamp, which is going to be a number. The first thing that we want to do inside of this function is get the player's profile. So we're going to say local profile equals player data dot profiles and index that with the player's user ID. If we're unable to get their profile, then we want to go ahead and stop the function right there. We then want to check if the player has been rewarded. Now, how are we going to check if the player has been rewarded? Well, remember, we added some information to the player's data earlier. So we're going to say profile.data.leaderboard rewards, which was the key that we added earlier, and we set that equal to a blank table. So we're then going to index this with the specific timestamp. And if the player has already been rewarded, then we want to stop the function right there as well. Now, if we are able to get the player's profile and they have not been rewarded yet, then let's go ahead and figure out what we need to reward them. So we're going to say local reward equals leaderboards config.getReward, and we're going to go ahead and pass through the timestamp. And we want to make sure that we use toNumber on this timestamp just in case that timestamp is a string when it should be a number. And now, if for some reason we're not able to find the reward, then we want to stop the function right there. Realistically, if you're unable to find the reward, then you might have forgot to set up the timestamp inside of here, or maybe you have some other weird issue going on. But as long as we do get the reward, then let's go ahead and give the player their pet. So we're going to say local pet, and we want to go ahead and create the pet instance. So we're going to say pets.createPet. What is the name of the pet? Well, of course, that is reward.pet. What is the rarity of the pet? Of course, that is reward.rarity. And finally, what is the upgrade of the pet? Well, that would be reward.upgrade. So now that we've created the pet, let's go ahead and give the player the pet, pets.givePet, pass through the player, pass through the pet, and don't forget, we do need to pass through true here as well for our force parameter, which will forcefully give the player the pet even if their pet inventory is already full and they cannot hold any more pets. And now that we've given the player their reward, we also need to update their player data to reflect this as well so that we don't accidentally reward them multiple times. So we're going to say profile.data.leaderboard rewards. We'll index that with the timestamp, and then we're going to set that equal to true. Now, of course, make sure you spell leaderboard rewards exactly how you spelled it earlier. Otherwise, you might run into some issues here. I know I did accidentally while scripting this and everything, so that's just a quick reminder to make sure you do that as well. Anyways, now that we've created this function, let's go ahead and start using it. And where are we going to start using it? Well, let's actually listen to that bindable event that we created earlier inside of our leaderboard script. So we're going to say leaderboards.reward connect, and then all we have to do is pass through the reward leaderboard pet function directly to that connect statement. So whenever that remote event is fired off, this function is going to be called. But remember, this event is only ever going to be fired if the player is currently in the server when our leaderboards have been saved. And that might not always be true. So in addition to doing that, we also want to check if a player needs to be rewarded every single time they join our game. So we can do that when we listen to the profile loaded event inside of here as well. So whenever a player joins our game, what we need to do is go through all of the winners of our leaderboards and check if this player is inside of any of them. So we're going to say for timestamp, winners in leaderboards.winners do. Then we're going to go ahead and loop through the winners table. So we're going to say for position, info in winners do. do. And now as we're going through each individual winner, we want to see if the user ID stored inside of that table is equal to the player's user ID that just joined our game. So we're going to say if info.userid equals player.userid, then we know that we've got the right player. But also one thing that we do want to do is make sure that the info.userid is a number. So just in case it's not, we're going to wrap that in a 2 number. So if we actually do find the player in the game, then what we're going to do is go ahead and call reward leaderboard pet. We'll pass through the player, and then we'll also pass through the timestamp as well. And with all that being said, that is the last thing that we actually have to do inside of here. Now you might be wondering, Monster, why did you say earlier that you have to implement rewards in a way that you really dislike? Or you might be wondering, why are we using this bindable event here instead of just having one of these modules require each other and then actually call that? Well, the reason that we have to do this is because of something called circular dependency. It actually has a couple of different names. Maybe you know it by something else. But basically, what we would really prefer to do is be able to require the pets module script inside of our leaderboards module script. Because instead of having to use this bindable event right here, what we could actually do is just say pets and then use the function that we need from the pets module script. So then you might be thinking, well, why can't the leaderboards module script just simply require the pets module script? And you might have already ruled this out in your head because we just require the leaderboards module script from the pets module script. But at the same time, you would think that we could actually just avoid all of this. But the unfortunate thing comes down to what is actually requiring the leaderboards module script, as well as what the pets module script requires. So what I mean by this is the pets module script actually requires the player data module script. And then if we look in our player data manager module script, which is required by the pets module script that we just talked about, we can look inside of here and we can also see that the player data manager module script also requires the leaderboards module script. So inside of the leaderboards module script, if we were to require the pets module script, that would pretty much just break the entire game until we undid that. And if you did that, depending on how your game is set up, you might not actually realize that this was the issue because your game pretty much just will not load and you more than likely just won't actually be told anything. Like you won't even receive an error. This is something that I realized while trying to create this system, and for about 10 minutes I was just wondering what the issue actually was, because usually you'll get an error in the console saying something like a circular dependency has happened and that's what this error is. But because of how we have our game set up, basically just nothing was loading and I didn't even receive any errors. So to summarize that whole thing again, the player data manager module is requiring the leaderboards module. So the reason that we can't require the pets module is because the pets module also requires the player data module, which again is requiring leaderboards module. So if we were to require the pets module inside of the leaderboards module, that would create a circular dependency and that would break our game, which obviously is not something that we want. So to get around the circular dependency, we have to use the bindable event to still do that form of communication that we would like to, just kind of in an indirect way, which avoids us having a circular dependency. Now, in reality, I made a pretty poor decision without actually planning this entire series fully through, and instead, I kind of made every video by video, which of course is something that I am definitely improving on and will never do for a future series. All future series will be fully developed before I even start creating videos on them, but unfortunately, when I created the series over a year ago, I was much less experienced and prepared in sort of the teacher realm, so it's just not something that I even thought of or thought I'd have issues with at all. But clearly with hindsight, I can see that that was a bad idea, and I'll certainly avoid that in all future content. Anyways, with that being said, we can go ahead and close out of the manager and the pets module script, but we do want to keep the leaderboards script open, and we also want to open up our leaderboards config module as well, because we most likely will have to change these timestamps because the time has kind of already passed. Okay, so I just generated a brand new timestamp, and I'm going to update it right here, as well as inside of my config. This timestamp is for a time which is in 3 minutes. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and start up my game. And of course, I made a mistake, but I wanted to take a short moment to show you how I debug any mistakes that I actually make, because I think it's a really, really valuable lesson. And honestly, I need to make a whole video on this. So pretty much the main way that I debug is just by using print statements. That's really the only method I ever actually use for debugging. So the first thing that I did is I went to the profile loaded event and I added a print statement right here so that I could actually see how the leaderboard.winners table is set up. And then I added some other print statements here as well. So I printed both this variable and this variable so that I could visually see and confirm that they are exactly the same. Then I simply just copied this condition and put that into a print statement to check if that is true. And you might be thinking, why are you printing both of these? There are some niche cases where you do want to do both of these things, because again, if you weren't using toNumber and you were just trying to check if both of these were equal to each other, and without even this other print statement, you kind of might not realize, but you might run into an issue where one of these was actually a string and it looked exactly the same visually. Like right down here, it looked exactly the same, and you just didn't realize that one of them was surrounded in quotation marks, so that one was actually a string, and you were trying to compare that string to the number. And I've had little different kind of niche cases that have happened to me a bunch of different times. So that's why my print statements have gotten to the point of where they've gotten to, and I just kind of print out a ton of different information, because 99% of the time, the more information, the better, the quicker and easier I can actually debug this. In addition to checking if all those things are working, I added some print statements inside of this function as well. Now, in my opinion, this is actually a bad example of how to do print statements. What I actually prefer is actually doing this. So I'm going to go ahead and print the word profile, and then I'm going to actually print the profile variable. Now, first of all, the reason that we're not printing it inside of the string right here is because if you try to include a table inside of a string, that's just going to print out like some random letters and numbers, or nil if it isn't actually a table. But if it is a table, I want to be able to expand it and click on the table, and you're unable to do that if you include that table inside of a string. You just want to print the table out itself so that you can look inside of the table and explore it. But another thing is that I like to add print statements before the if statement, because if you add it after the if statement, you're only ever going to see those printed if the if statement has passed. Now, don't get me wrong, that can definitely be useful, but another thing is that if you're not seeing this first print statement, you might just assume that this function isn't being called. So of course, an alternative to that is we could add another print statement right here, but that's just kind of besides the point. And just to clarify, I like to add all of my print statements like that. So I would say something like has been rewarded, and then we would print that variable right here, and then I would do the exact same thing for this print statement and this print statement as well, all before the if statements. Well, excluding this one, obviously, because there is no if statement. But anyways, with all that being said, I'm going to go ahead and remove all of these print statements because I found my issue. And the issue actually is that when we're trying to get the profile, we are trying to get that by indexing the profiles table with the player's user ID, and that's not actually how that's set up. It's kind of crazy that this is the thing that I messed up on, and we've been using this for the last year. Anyways, we're actually supposed to index the profiles table with the specific player. So now let's go ahead and save our game and start it up. And once we start it up, since the time has passed, we should actually be rewarded as soon as we join the game. So we load into the game, and then we can go ahead and check our pets, and we can actually see that we have been rewarded the dog pet that we did deserve. Now, of course, our sign still says resetting soon, and that is because the way that I have our system set up is for us to manually change the timestamp every single time we want to reset those leaderboards. And the reason that I have it set up like that rather than being completely automatic is because, first of all, being completely automatic adds another level of complexity to this, which I felt was kind of not a great idea in all honesty. Maybe in another series where it's better structured, I would do that. But also at the same time, some people like to change up certain things before another season begins, and they like to prepare before the next one starts. So that's why with this system, you can change it on your own time. But now, if you do want to change the time, and let's say that we want to start the second season, let's go ahead and generate another UNIX timestamp, and then we're going to go ahead and update the leaderboard end timestamp variable, and we're going to want to go ahead and add another table to the rewards table. So we're going to go ahead and copy and paste that, and then replace this second timestamp with our new timestamp, and then instead of rewarding a dog for this one, we'll go ahead and say cat. Then we'll go into our game. We can see that the leaderboards will be reset in about 2 minutes, so let's go ahead and get some clicks. We can also see that these leaderboards have been reset up here. Let's go ahead and stop our game to forcefully save the leaderboards so that we do place on them. Then we can start the game up again. And then once this is started up, we should be able to see ourselves on those leaderboards, and then we can wait until the reset time has happened. So yeah, once we load into our game, we can see that we have been added to those leaderboards. So we did forcefully save that. And now we just have to wait about 1 minute and 30 seconds until we should be rewarded directly with a cat pet. All right, so we have about 5 seconds before it resets. And now we have about 0 seconds. It did reset, and we did just receive the cat pet. So we can see that both methods of rewarding the player are working. If the player is in the game when the leaderboards do reset, they instantly receive that reward. Or if the player is not in the game when they first join the game after the leaderboards have been reset, then they will also be rewarded as well. So this whole system is working perfectly. Anyways, ladies and gentlemen, with all that being said, we are officially done with this episode. As always, if you guys did enjoy the video, make sure you smash the like button. Go check the Patreon out if you want to support me. And with that being said, I'll see you guys in the next video.